Hello, everybody, wherever you may be. My name's Larry. My call sign Kilo 7 Hotel November. Welcome to a redo of Ham Radio Live Show 29. Had a chance to, review it. I was like, oh no, just way too many mistakes. I don't like to make mistakes that could mislead anybody. Okay, got a little bit of had some Jello for lunch. Sorry for dinner. Looks a little red there, a little red. Anyway. Raspberry. It's my favorite. Anyway, we talked a little bit on show 29 about antennas and how they're rated for gain. Two ways. DBi, which is the decibels over an isotropic antenna, which essentially is an antenna in free space. It's a made-up antenna. It's an antenna that doesn't exist because essentially it sits in the middle of free space, radiates equally all the way around, omnidirectionally, right? Think of the sun, same way. The way that the heat radiates off the sun, same way the signal radiates off of a DBi antenna. Then you have a DBd antenna, which is a decibel dipole antenna. A dipole antenna has a 2.15 dB gain over a DBi antenna, and there's a reason for that. The way that a DBi antenna works is it works omnidirectional, but a dipole, remember, if you are not in a ham radio license class, or maybe you want to and want to learn a little bit more about antennas, a dipole antenna essentially is a wire. It can be a wire going up one way. It can be a wire that's put into a V pattern that comes from the top and goes down. It could be like an L. There's lots of ways to do dipoles. And a dipole antenna essentially will radiate off of its side. So imagine that V, right? And if you're looking straight at the V, so you don't see the V, you're seeing just the wires, okay? The antenna radiates away from it. Essentially, that's how it does it. It will still go around the edges as well, but there's slight gain going both forward and back broadside of the antenna. So DBd is 2.15 dB stronger than a DBi. Okay, want to make sure that's clear. The other thing is there's a big difference between amplifiers and gain antennas. Okay, there's lots of gain antennas out there. Most of them are directional, although you can get some good verticals that do really good gain, but a dB, let's say I'm trying to think antenna wise, a Yagi or a log periodic, a hex beam, a Moxon, OptiBeam, those kind of antennas, they're directional and they have forward gain. They have quite a bit of forward gain. And so the gain is achieved because instead of all that power that's going from 360 degrees, essentially that power is condensed into an area that's pointed in whatever direction you want it to be. It doesn't make your signal more powerful. That's the thing to keep in mind. An amplifier does that. You put power from your radio, say it's 50 watts of power in your radio, into an amplifier. The amplifier then takes that 50 watts and through the power of amplification makes 600 out of it, okay? And then that 600 watts goes out your feed line and into your antenna. Hopefully both are good, meaning your feed line's good and your antenna is resonant. So you can get just about every watt you can out of that amplifier. But let's say you're running an amplifier and you have a directional beam. It helps because you've got more power going out, but also longer reach because you have better gain on the antenna. Think of gain as a way to get the distance of the antenna signal out farther, okay? An amplifier will do the same thing, but what it does is it does so through power. It does so through amplification. An antenna can do just fine if you get a really good antenna with gain and you have, say, a 100 watt rig and you get maybe a 6 or a 7 dB gain antenna. I mean, that makes your signal go out quite a ways when you turn the rotator of the antenna to point certain directions. You'd be surprised. It really does. People will compare it to similar to if you had 800 watts or whatever. but really it's basically the antenna will reach farther. Also, it will receive farther. That's really important to discuss. A directional antenna has the benefit of not only getting your signal out farther, but also letting you hear farther out as well and louder. It helps to bring up the gain. So that's what I was trying to say, but it got mashed up. And I didn't want to leave it that way because I thought, man, that's too confusing. The reason I do these shows is because I love radio. I've loved it since I was a child. And I wanted my ham radio license at 14, and I didn't go for it because I just couldn't do code. I've told the story before. I just couldn't do code. And it stopped me from getting my license until even way past the point where the FCC took code out of the requirement. I didn't know. I had no idea. I was buying a really good AM and shortwave receiving and radio so I could, because I collected them. And the guy asked me what my call sign was. And I said, well, I don't have one. The seller of the radio asked me that question. I said, I don't have a call sign. I could never learn code. And it was then that I heard the news that, oh, they took code out a long time ago. Oh, really? So that's when we started our test. And I don't want others to make that same mistake I did. I want you to know you can pass this test. I really do. So please understand, this comes from my heart. It really does. It's about my love for radio, sharing it with you, and explaining to you that if you're worried about passing your ham radio license, don't do that. You don't need to be intimidated by the test. There are great online courses. There are great radio clubs who can teach you the basics that you need to pass the test. And we all want you to pass it. We do. So we want you on the air. And part of what this channel exists for is to show you what the experience is like to be a ham radio operator live without just, edited parts that shows when you make the contacts, but what it's really like. I mean, sometimes you get contacts, sometimes you don't. And with that, you just enjoy the process of continuing to try. That's what makes the good long distance contacts so special. Now, something else that's on the test, it will regard nets. A net is a group of 3 or more licensed amateurs who get together on a frequency at a given time, and they basically talk amongst each other. Now, it's at least 3. It could be any number over 3, but the way that the test is written is it needs to be 3 or more. Okay, so 3 or more like-minded people that are involved on the same frequency, and basically they talk about anything from radios, gear, politics sometimes, or even trying to snag DXs, trying to get long distance contacts or help you work all states. There's some great nets out there. 7190 on 40 meters, right about, what time is it? Midnight Pacific. It's midnight Pacific now. So during daylight savings time, it's midnight Pacific. It moves to 11 p.m. Pacific once we hit standard time here. So it's run from different areas. Different net operators will run it, net control, so to speak. Okay. So there's a second one that's really good for DX if you want to try and get a hold of countries from around the world. It's called the 7.163 net. That's where we're at right now on 40 meters. It's run by a really good ham, Jimmy, WB2REM. I've talked about him previously in this channel, and he's a good guy. He really is. Now, he's all the way in Port St. Lucie, Florida, and he doesn't always hear my signal well because I'm all the way in the other end of the country here in Independence, Oregon. Much time, his directional antenna is not pointed towards me. So he hears me off the side or sometimes maybe a little off the back of his directional antenna. And Jimmy's always nice enough to turn his antenna over, say hello, and then when there's a DX call, maybe from Europe, the Caribbean, South America, Australia, whatever, what we do is we just take turns trying to work that station. It's that simple. It's a lot of fun. So nets exist for that reason. One other really important point that I didn't make clearly enough in the first Ham Radio Live 29 episode, was the point that there are, and this is very important, there are there's a hierarchy, okay, in terms of who gets the frequency first, okay? If you're a shortwave broadcaster, you have priority over any amateur in any country. It's unlawful, actually, for you to broadcast within the bandwidth of your transmit signal near a shortwave broadcaster. Okay, can't do it. It's illegal. So that's something to keep in mind. Shortwave broadcasters always have priority. The second group of priority people are emergency communication folks, okay? Those folks are dealing with human life and safety, and they get frequency. If you're on a frequency and they need it, you just need to bow and say, it's yours, okay? So there are some preferences in terms of getting frequencies to people that are really important that you need to understand. So I just want to make sure people understood those, and I didn't want to leave those mistakes out there because they're way too essential for folks that are really interested in getting their license. Just for a moment, please. Okay, so as you can see from the clock, it's 3:13 in the morning on a Saturday morning, well, Saturday night, Sunday morning. So it's a great time to work DX, all right? It's just before sunrise, about 3 hours away from sunrise here now, but in the early summer, great time to work DX. There's an old saying in DX, and I found this to be very true. Sunset, southwest, sunrise, southeast. It works. It really does. And the way it works, and the reason it works that way is because of gray line. It's called gray line propagation. Gray line propagation essentially is there's different levels of the atmosphere. And those levels of the atmosphere essentially help us communicate. It's a great way to describe, I guess, because of the different layers of the atmosphere, exactly how things work. And because the ionosphere in the atmosphere is split up into essentially 4 different levels, 3 at night, you get the opportunity to take advantage of it right before and immediately after sunrise and sunset. I have found, for me, when sunset comes and it's just before sunset, happens, my propagation is outstanding to the south. It's outstanding, especially southwest, really strong. In the morning hours, right about gray line, within about 30 to 45 minutes of sunrise until about the same amount after, southeast does very well. Now, the reason for this is because your signal has a property where it comes off of the ionosphere. The higher the level of the ionosphere, the better your signal will bounce. That's just the best way to describe it. I'm looking for the photo that I had that I showed earlier on propagation to try and help explain this because it does make a big difference. I think I have it right here. Let me try to put it on the screen. If it's the wrong one, I apologize, okay? So this is basically trying to explain to you how it all works, and that is coax cable. Just so you know, the one on the bottom is LMR 400. It's a very good, it's LMR 400, basically. It's a copy of it. It's very low loss cable. Then in the middle is RG8X and then RGU in the top. So it's thicker cable, tends to hold signals better. So apologize for that. Trying to find the slide. It's hard to find. They're very tiny pictures that I have to look here with, and I want to be able to, make sure I'm giving you the right information on this. But the best way to describe it, as I did before in here, was to tell you that when you're working with the ionosphere, essentially what you have is you have radio signals that bounce way up in the air. Okay, let me see if this is it. I think this is it. Hope so. Here we go. All right. During the daytime, the D layer is like a blanket. It attenuates or helps to hold down signals from reaching the reflective E and F layers, okay? So you have the D layer, which just gets really charged up with ions, and those ions swallow up signals. Now, if you go up higher in frequency, your frequencies, your signal is going to bounce through that. It's going to go right through it, just going to plow through it. Okay. But, like 80 meters, 160, it'd be horrible, especially 160. It'll be horrible on the D layer because it just will stop it. So it essentially just doesn't work very well for long distance. Then you have the first reflective layer, which is the E layer, which is about 100 kilometers up. And then you have the F1 and F2 layers, which are at 2 to 300 kilometers in the air. Now, because the F1 and F2 layers are so high, you got to think your signal essentially is going to move this slide just a little if I can. I'm going to try and shrink it down so you can see me a little bit, maybe a little bit. There we go. Hold on. There we go. All right. Because the way that the ionosphere works, your transmit signal is going to come from here and it's going to go up and then it's going to bounce back down. Now, the angle of transmit, your transmit angle, is very important in your antenna. You want it to be as low as possible. And the reason why is because if it goes a long way out before it hits the E or the F layer, it's going to bounce and go a long way back. Okay? That's why a lower takeoff angle is really important for you in an antenna. That's why getting tide poles up higher in the air is better because the higher you go up, the lower your takeoff angle is. Now, at night, that D layer that swallows up signals goes away. And that makes working on, say, 80 and 40 and 160 much better because that signal absorbing D layer is totally gone. Now you have the reflective E layer, and the F layer actually combines into one large area. So you've got a very large area above the E layer to bounce your signals. It's called skip. If you're over seawater, that skip intensifies because how this works, just so you understand, the sun's rays hit the ionosphere, it's charged with ions. Once an electrical signal, like a transmission signal, hits it, the ions that are in the layer vibrate quickly. Okay? The vibration of the ions in the ionosphere within these ranges vibrate, and then what they do, because of the vibration, they cause the signal to be reflected. Okay? So that's how signals travel so far. They vibrate, all those ions vibrate and go down. In seawater, salt also has ions in it. Okay? There's part of the atomic structure of salt. When you have a signal bounce to salt water, that's a great reflector. It's going to bounce the signal right back up again and hit the F layer or the E layer and come back down. That's why when you work near seawater, like an ocean or a sea, you're going to have usually pretty good propagation to get out long distance. That's the reason why my signals tend to go very well down to New Zealand and Australia, even though they're about 8,000 miles away. Even using 100 watts, because of the takeoff angle of my dipole and being this close to the Pacific Ocean, it just works. So that's something to think about with your test, all right? The D layer doesn't reflect, it absorbs signals. The word you might see on the test is it attenuates signals. Now, attenuation means to essentially lower, okay? The E layer is the first reflective layer. Then the F1 and F2 layers also reflect, but that's gray line. Gray line's different. When gray line comes, let's say it's sunrise. When gray line comes, everything behind you, that D layer is starting to form, right? But where you are, there's not enough sunlight yet to charge up the ions in the D layer to create it. So you have that E layer and F layer still way up in the air. You can make some fantastic calls then, because if you're going in, remember, sunrise southeast. The reason why in the southeast, the D layer is already formed. However, because you're transmitting basically at gray line, which is near sunrise, that signal goes up because there is no D layer. It's going to hit that E or probably F layer, go way up, and it's going to be reached a long ways away to the southeast. Now, I'm going to show you, we're going to talk about a net real quick. I don't want to go long on this one. I want to get some sleep, but I do want to tell you, I've talked about Jim's net a few times. It's the 7.163 net. Just a second. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Jimmy's net, the 7163, does DX, but they talk a lot too. It runs from 5 p.m. Pacific, 5 a.m. Pacific until 7:30 p.m. a.m. Yes, I'm tired. Okay, so from 5 to 7:30 in the morning, no matter if it's daylight savings time or standard time, that's what time they do it, okay? So this is the 7163 net. Let me make a call in just so you can hear them and get to know them a little bit. I think this is one of the best nets there is on all of ham radio. Jim is so dedicated to this net. He does it 7 days a week. Now, that's quite a responsibility. He's net control. A lot of nets, people will transfer net control to each other. But Jim is really dedicated, and I admire him for that. So let's see if we can make a quick call over to Jim to say hello. Now, where he is, it's sunrise already. Okay. Keep in mind, take a look at the clock here. This is Pacific time. So here it's 3:24. Where he is in Port St. Lucie, Florida, 6:24. So the sun's already up, or it's coming up. It's nearly up. See what I mean? So he's at gray line right now, but we're still deep in night. Let's see. He's going to have to still move his antenna toward me because he's going to hear me off the side of it or the back, but Jim will turn it. He's that kind of guy. Let's go to the 71.7163 net and say hello to Jim and the gang. We'll tune up, make sure we're good. We're on the high gain AV680 vertical, 33 feet. Kilo 7 Hotel November. Good morning, Jim. And keep in mind, sometimes propagation isn't the best, so he may not hear me at all, especially if I'm on the back of his antenna. He got me. Good morning, Jim. Doing Ham Radio Live, special edition talking about nets, and we're featuring yours right now. So I told him about what a nice guy you are, so you better be good to me. I appreciate that, Jim. You're always good here. You're 5'9" here in Oregon. You got a good signal always. How's DX going for you? Well, that's pretty good. I've seen a lot of fade on 40 lately, so I think that's fantastic. I won't keep you. I know you got stuff to do, but I did want to introduce people to you, and I thought it'd be nice to be able to share what you do there. Keep up the good work, Jim. I think the world of you. You know that. So, WB2REM K7HN. Thanks for turning the beam around, Jim. Have a great day. And there you go. So, see, Jim will usually turn the beam around to say hello. And keep in mind, that's coast to coast. That's coming from the Pacific coast, the northwest portion of Oregon, and is coming all the way to the southwest part of Florida. Great, that. look, if you're new to ham radio and you're really into talking to people from outside the country, 7.163 is a great net. Now, for us in the Pacific time zone, I know it stretches us, right? Because it's early in the morning or late at night, however you want to, do it. But the point is, it's worth it because you're going to, get a chance to contact people. Because what Jim does is he'll call CQDX. Someone from, say, Great Britain is going to call in. And then if you hear that person, everybody that's on the net has a chance to work that person and get the QSO. How cool is that? That's why nets are so cool. And that's why good nets like the 7.163 net are so special. They're just so special. And I enjoy being a part of that group. I really do. So, for new hams or people that are interested in ham radios, there's lots of people you can meet on nets and become friends with them, get to know about their families, their passions, all of that, and have some fun in the process. So, nets are something very, very important. Wanted to share that with you this morning before we conk out. So, everybody, we'll see you today, hopefully at 1 p.m. Pacific. We'll talk about some stuff regarding that special Praz RX system that's made by Heil. Heil is really the name in microphones and headphones and speakers. They really do a great job there. And they're an American company. So we're going to talk about that today and how it helps improve the signal you hear. In fact, I'd like to get one to review. And one of the benefits for it for me will be because it is an XLR out, I can run it right to my processing gear and you'll hear everything on the rig exactly as I do. So I think the PRAS system is in Larry's future very soon. By the grace of God, of course. All right. Guys, have a great day. It's Sunday. It's the 13th of September, and we'll be back at 1 p.m. Pacific. Until then, God bless you. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching Ham Radio Live. Goodbye, everybody.